right, we're going to start straight away and introduce our next speaker. Dr. Jennifer Roberts built health platforms at ARPA-H, designed to withstand biological threats and systemic failures, resilience by design. She shaped health technology strategy at the White House, served as Deputy Director of DARPA's Information Innovation Office, earning the Superior Public Service Medal. She's seen AI from inside the most ambitious research agencies in the world. Today, she's here to tell us what it can and cannot do for our health. Please welcome Dr. Roberts. Roberts makes her way up. If you have lost a ring, it is up here. Please do not make your spouse unhappy, and just contemplate if you're missing something from a certain finger. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Jen Roberts. If you're looking in the program, I am not Susan Menares, I'm filling in for her. We both work together at ARPA-H, which is a relatively new government funding agency. So today, I'd like to talk about AI in biomedical R&D in healthcare, and to what extent it enables breakthroughs versus acts as a Band-Aid versus presents existential risks. So, just jumping right to the chase here. Really, the same algorithms, the same capabilities that have this potential to unlock breakthroughs also bring with them these risks of existential risk, the potential for Band-Aids and misapplication. And really, we have a new type of technology where all of these are intricately intertwined, right? We can't easily decouple them. So effectively the same type of capability that can make it so that perhaps we can do a diagnosis faster than 10 different experts also brings the risk that perhaps there'll be a misdiagnosis that has the potential for life or death consequences. Same algorithms that could make it so that we discover a new drug that helps millions of people in days versus decades. That also can make it so that we can find cyber vulnerabilities way faster, perhaps have folks exploit them, which is critical because a third of our nation's hospitals are at risk of closure due to financial insecurity. So a ransomware attack is sometimes the only thing between a hospital staying open or closing and making it so that there's a part of the country that now doesn't have access to medical care. So all of these things are very intertwined. So I think the real question then is, how do we make it so that we are maximizing the potential for breakthrough, we are mitigating existential risks, and also minimizing the extent to which AI is used as a Band-Aid, either by making it so that those Band-Aid applications are a stepping stone to the next breakthrough, or alternatively, making it so that we replace it with something that's working better. So how might we do this? I'd say that there's a number of more mature industries that have already grappled with this. If we think about the automotive industry as an example, right? Billions of people use cars. Definitely have life or death consequences in certain circumstances. And over time, we've built up an automotive safety industry that has come up with seat belts, anti-lock brakes, airbags, et cetera. And every time we have one of those new safeguards, you can see that the death rates from vehicle accidents go down. So that industry, that safety industry for automobiles, has actually grown up to be close to a $150 billion industry as of 2026. So the question is, what would an AI safety industry look like for biomedicine and healthcare as we move these techniques into production? So again, we can maximize the potential for breakthrough, minimize the chance of harm. So that's going to be the focus of this talk. How do we really build this vibrant, trustworthy AI ecosystem that really is maximizing those benefits, minimizing the chance of harm? And the challenge here is that really for a lot of these new emerging algorithms, we don't yet understand how to create safeguards. So throughout the talk, I'm going to focus on a number of different case studies. The first area is going to be in antimicrobial resistance, where I'll talk through some examples of breakthroughs in places where perhaps we're a little bit further ahead in using AI techniques to help with things like reducing the potential for harm. Clinical decision support. This is an area where a lot of the safeguards are still an active area of research, so talk through some examples that seem promising. And then biosecurity, which gets a lot more into the potential for existential risk, and where there potentially is some cause for hope. Okay, so first, antimicrobial resistance. So this is the third leading cause of death. It currently kills close to 5 million people per year, and that's slated to go up because the antibiotics that we have on the market today are becoming less and less effective. Core problem here is that we can't today diagnose whether a bacterial infection will become resistant in a clinically relevant time frame. It normally takes 24 to 48 hours to get a sense of what type of bacterial infection somebody has and whether it will respond to antibiotics. And by that time, generally speaking, the doctor already has to prescribe broad spectrum antibiotics, which makes the problem worse, because it makes it so that we're having more bacteria that are becoming resistant to antibiotics. So it's a big problem. We don't have the ability to diagnose. And it's been decades since we've had really structurally new antibiotics on the market. So we don't have a very robust pipeline that's making it so that we continue to have new antibiotics. So I'd like to highlight just a couple examples of work in this area. So there's some work coming out of Fair Bio and the Collins Lab that has been using a generative deep learning approach in order to discover new structurally distinct types of antibiotics. It's the first example of an AI-designed antibiotic, and they in fact have 3 new structurally distinct ones that have been discovered that are going through preclinical tests right now. The model that they're using is actually being released open source, so it's available to the scientific community, which is awesome. And it's also an example of an algorithmic approach where they're folding in toxicity screening. So effectively, they're screening these drug candidates ahead of time to estimate the likelihood that they might be toxic in humans, so that they are picking the ones that are most likely to get through animal trials and be safe for humans and move through trials more quickly, more safely. So there's a lot to be excited about with this type of direction. Then another example has to do with the diagnosis. So again, this is an area where we don't currently have a mechanism to identify whether bacterial infection is what type of bacteria is causing that infection and what antibiotic it might respond to. So there's some work coming out of a large collaboration led by Harvard that is coming up with a fundamentally new type of technique that is based on a microfluidic device. So this device has millions of trenches, and what will happen is they have a technique that can take a sample of blood, pull out 100% of the bacteria from that blood, and then put each of the bacteria effectively in a different trench. So what will happen is that the bacteria will continue to grow, and each of those trenches will become genetically homogeneous. And then using hyperspectral imaging and different types of AI classification algorithms effectively, they're able to identify what that bacteria is without doing any sequencing. So that then means that they can treat the bacteria with different types of antibiotics to determine which one it's susceptible to and whether it's resistant. So that way we're moving toward being able to have doctors very quickly identify the right antibiotic for the right infection. This is currently in a prototype stage, and there's 2 different companies that are working to move it into both hospital settings and research settings. There's a company called Blasted that's working on that extraction and testing in minutes in a clinical setting, and then another company, Bifrost, that is creating a research device that could screen 5 million cells per week. So it's potentially a completely new way for us to be able to look at bacterial infections and be able to track them over time. Now, from an algorithmic standpoint, from a data science standpoint, what's exciting here is that that creates the potential for us to have completely new types of data streams. So if you fast forward a bit and imagine every hospital having the ability to screen what type of bacterial infections patients have and identify which ones are resistant, they're potentially generating terabytes of data per device. It's an opportunity for us to really make that data available so that we can track bacterial infections, how they spread through populations, and how antimicrobial resistance spreads at a level of fidelity that has been impossible before. Now, key to that is how we think about building that data infrastructure. I'd argue here that this is an example where data as a public utility could be a good model. So making it so that that data is available to researchers, it's available to folks that are exploring the epidemiology behind it. So there's a lot to think about and opportunities for us to really make it so that the next generation of AMR research is really accelerated very broadly. So then moving into clinical applications, so things like AI diagnostics, patient-facing chatbots. So if we think about clinical applications, no doubt everybody's heard a lot about the potential for breakthroughs here. We have things like AI-powered diagnostics, remote monitoring, virtual health assistants, et cetera. There's a lot of potential, right? We can unlock the potential of precision medicine. At the same time, there's a lot that we don't yet understand about how to do that in a safe way, so I want to talk about two different examples. One around predictive AI. So predictive AI, this would be more, think radiology diagnostics. So somebody's taking some type of image and they're using that to make a diagnosis. Perhaps they're just looking at an image and trying to determine whether a patient has cancer. Or alternatively, some type of analytic that's taking measurements from somebody's health record and trying to predict whether they might end up in an inpatient setting or alternatively end up with sepsis in the next 24 hours. So this is it's a type of machine learning approach. So the algorithms are from arguably the last generation of AI techniques, more deep learning, right? And then after that, I'll talk a little bit about patient-facing chatbots. This is the newest version of AI that you'll hear about with ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera. So for predictive AI, really the promise here is that we have the potential to make it so that we're doing image diagnostics at a superhuman rate with superhuman accuracy, if we can manage to unlock that. Now, the challenge is that we don't yet understand how to build safeguards. And in fact, that's interesting. In fact, when these algorithms are fielded, what we find is that they degrade in the clinical setting. So fundamentally at the core, what they're doing is they're relying on the statistics of the image that they're getting off a particular type of instrument. And what will happen is that maybe that instrument changes, maybe the calibration, maybe it becomes miscalibrated. Perhaps the patient population in a particular clinic is different than the demographics of the patient population that were studied during a clinical trial. All of these differences in medical context make it so that once you have an AI diagnostic that is in a clinical setting, it degrades over time. And how much it degrades over time depends a lot on the specifics of that clinical environment. So it's actually worse than that though, because it doesn't just degrade over time in a very consistent way. So if you think about like a car, if you have a recall, every single car is going to benefit from the same part, right? We know how to deal with that type of recall because it follows physics, right? Here, since we're looking at the statistics and the context, what software updates have been happening in each of those clinical environments, when these algorithms stop working, they stop working in a different way in each clinical setting. So imagine that you have an algorithm that's now been distributed to 100,000 different sites. It's going to break in 100,000 different ways, right? And right now we have no way of telling when that's happening or how it's happening. This is a pretty robust phenomenon. If you look actually across 4 different sectors, 91% of the algorithms will degrade as they age. For radiology specifically, 81% degrade, and about half of that is moderate to significant degradation, and about a quarter is significant. And right now we don't have any way of helping to monitor. So the key insight here, though, is that from a data perspective, we have the information. It's possible if we set up our algorithms so that it is looking at the patient, what happens with the patient over time. So if you go back again to this idea that we have, or this example where we have a patient with some type of imaging where the algorithm is trying to determine whether they have cancer or not, right? What will happen is at some point in the future, the health record will contain information about whether they have cancer or not. Either they will have gone in for a test and will have a positive or negative test result, or time will just pass. And either the patient ends up sick or they don't, right? And right now we have no way of extracting that information from the health record and feeding that back to the algorithm, and more importantly to the clinician, so that the doctors know, can I trust this algorithm for this patient population? So really being able to create that feedback loop, make it available to doctors, make it available for hospitals, so that they know what is an appropriate level of trust for these algorithms. So that's all areas where more research into the types of safeguards is needed. Then talking about patient-facing chatbots. So these are the large language models. That's the type of algorithm underneath them. It's anything with the chat interface. So for clinicians, there's things like open evidence that's become quite popular that gives folks a chat interface to things like the New England Journal of Medicine. The case that I want to focus on is providing guidance directly to patients and how we might do that in a safe way. Because even though every single chatbot out there says that it's not supposed to be used for medical device, it's not cleared for that, there's still millions of queries per day, per week, where people ask medical questions and they're hoping to get some good answers. And honestly, sometimes that helps with differential diagnosis. It points patients in good directions, but it also carries risks. So before I dive into how we might think about safeguards there, I just wanted to take a moment to give an intuition for how these large language model algorithms work. So this is going to be a bit of audience participation. It's a cognitive science experiment, actually from a cognitive science experiment back in 1983. So I'll give everybody a minute to read. Okay, so just a show of hands, has everybody read the question? Are we good? I am curious, how many people think A? Okay, how many people think B? Okay, we're at about half and half. Now, if I were to tell you that you were in a math class and we care about the mathematical definition of probability, right? Which of these statements is more probable from a mathematical perspective? How many people? A, right? Now, if instead I said you were reading a novel or you were reading some type of short story, and the first paragraph of this short story is that paragraph up there, which sentence is more likely to end up later on in that story, A or B? B. There you go. Context matters. That's effectively how LLMs are working too, right? They have a probabilistic distribution for how to interpret information, right? So if we're talking about talking to an LLM, trying to get information about medical advice, well, it's combed all through the internet. It has information from abstracts and journal articles, say from the New England Journal of Medicine. That is going to give you one type of answer. It also has information from every single forum where folks are sharing anecdotes and old wives' tales and everything. That's going to give you a very different type of perspective, right? And the way that you phrase a question is going to depend on the extent to which that answer is going to come from all kinds of forums that may have your grandmother's advice in them, or something that is a peer-reviewed medical journal, right? And I know as I am interacting with the LLMs, it's pretty haphazard what part of the semantic space I end up in. Oh. Great, so now how do we think about evaluating them? I want to take a moment to talk about why this is hard, okay? So first is the complexity. Many, many ways to ask the same question. The responses, as we just noted, depend on context, and the errors are very counterintuitive, so it's hard for a person to understand why there's an error or figure out how to fix it. We don't really understand it well, and on top of that, medical knowledge changes very quickly. These algorithms are also fundamentally probabilistic. So if you have some sentence where the words cancer and diabetes are equally likely to occur, it is a coin flip what answer you're going to get or what word will be in that sentence when the algorithm provides you an answer. That's very hard to test, right? Models, context data change rapidly. Think about how many versions of ChatGPT you've seen. It keeps on changing. So how do we think about evaluation for something that changes so rapidly and people consistently interact in very unique ways, right? In unexpected ways. Then this is a high stakes domain. There's millions of people, so even if it's making a small error, that small error might still affect thousands of people and have health consequences for a large part of the population. How do we think about that? Because the things that are harder to measure are these edge cases, are these unusual phenomenon. And ultimately, we don't have frameworks, right? If we think about the way that clinical trials are structured, fundamentally, we're making the assumption that either the physics of a medical device or the biochemistry is somewhat stationary. So the things that you see when you're testing in a clinical trial are likely to be the same things that you see later on, right, once it's fielded. And these algorithms, none of those assumptions hold nearly to the extent that they are held for other types of medical devices. So we need a new type of framework to think about validation. Hence, this is still an area of active research. So some promising areas. This is some work coming out of Stanford looking at red team exercises. So effectively, this is pulling together sets of doctors, patients, computer scientists that are all probing LLMs, in this case with about 1,500 different queries to understand the nature of the errors that are being made. Helps people understand when to trust, helps people debug. In this particular study, the LLM gave good answers about 80% of the time. That also means that 1 in 5 questions were questionable, right, responses. And of those, about a quarter had some type of safety implications. It's not good. That means 1 in 20 answers have a problem with safety. I know I wouldn't want that for my children. And about half of the ones with an error have some type of hallucination in them. Then more on the promising directions. This work is actually out of Vanderbilt. So here they're looking at a hybrid approach, specifically looking at mental health responses. So mental health responses, there's a lot that therapists think about when trying to determine whether an answer is good, right? So of course we have hallucinations, we have things like, are you omitting important information? But there's also criteria about just the tone of the response. So what this team's converged on is an ensemble method that uses some LLM processing paired with about 10 dimensions that have been designed by therapists in order to be able to scale the analysis to larger numbers of queries to test for safety. And their ensemble method that has this dual LLM plus human knowledge is actually outperforming both people and the current state-of-the-art for pure LLM responses. So it's promising, and it has the potential to scale the safety checks. So now talking about biosecurity. So this is the area where we get into some existential risks. You guys may have seen an article in the New York Times not that long ago about how AI bots can tell scientists how to make biological weapons. Sounds pretty scary. As I understand it, they come up with some pretty convincing instructions, right? Because these algorithms are very good at coming up with step-by-step recipes. Now, every biologist that I've talked to, and of course there's tons of experts in the audience here, say that, at this point, distribution is still quite hard. We don't need to be concerned about this happening tomorrow, but at the same time, in the future, we really do need to think about planning for such things. So in terms of what is cause for hope, though, some of the same folks that are doing these evaluations of the LLMs in order to probe the potential for them to be used for bioweapons are also publishing on how we think about protecting people, right? So if you're interested in this topic, I'd recommend this Geneva policy paper where they talk about reusable respirators that could protect critical workers from every virus until we can get to the point where we have some type of treatment or vaccine for a new emerging pathogen. And actually one of the authors on that paper has been looking into low cost of respirators with the idea that perhaps we can build a national stockpile. So then how do we think about really future-proofing them? Because we don't just want to plan for the worst case. We would really like to make the worst case far less probable. So if we think about biosafety in labs, we already have the BSL 1 through 4 system, right? In order for us to make sure that if you have a pathogen that's very dangerous, only certain people have access to it and they have the right safeguards in place. So I'd argue that it's important to think about the same thing for data, for models, and for parts of the semantic space. So that way we ensure that folks that are exploring the genetic sequences that are either exactly the same or close by have functionally equivalent components, that information is really just accessible to folks that are working toward better treatments or ways of adapting the insights to help treat other diseases. But I'd argue that us having some mechanism to protect that information because it's so dual use is a good investment in the future. Then for the regular chatbots, I'd also argue that indicators and warnings. So if we think about the financial sector, we have lots of indicators and warnings for things like fraudulent transactions or money laundering and everything. That's all built into our software systems. Thinking about what that looks like for biosecurity is also extremely important. Okay, and then just a moment on digital health security. So this is, think ransomware attacks against hospitals. Again, 1/3 of our nation's rural hospitals are at risk of closing because of financial instability. So that means that a ransomware attack on a hospital actually we already have seen instances where that's caused a hospital to close. It also increases mortality rates at the hospitals that are hit, and it increases the rate of cardiac arrest at the remaining hospitals because so many patients need to be diverted. So this has life or death consequences. And we're at a point where the AI algorithms, if you look at things like Mythos from Anthropic, and they're able to automatically find cyber vulnerabilities. I would highlight the Cyber Grand Challenge and the 3 performers that won that. Their algorithms continue to outperform the one from Anthropic, if anybody's interested. There's a nice paper that I can share where one of the teams coming out of the AI Cyber Challenge was just jointly funded by DARPA and ARPA-H. ARPA-H brought the hospital piece to it. They found an additional 12 0 days in addition to what the Anthropic one did, and found everything that Anthropic had found. So why do I bring that up? What they've also worked on is automatically patching systems, which is far more important, and arguably we have more data on patches and secure systems than we do on exploits. So if we put in this automatic patching and vulnerability detection into our development pipelines, you can imagine a future where we are removing all of the software vulnerabilities before we're fielding medical devices or updates to software. I'd argue that's where we need to go, so that way we raise the bar on what we expect software to be, so that we expect that medical new medical types of devices and software will have no known vulnerabilities when it gets fielded. We're very far from that, but from a technical standpoint, we're much closer than we've ever been. Okay, so just opportunities to move towards this vibrant, trustworthy AI ecosystem. Things like data as a public utility, especially things for areas like antimicrobial resistance, continuous recalibration for predictive analytics. These are the ones where you're doing, say, imaging diagnostics and they degrade in the field. Really getting clinicians involved in understanding when LLMs are working or not, and having automated scalable evaluations, biosafety levels for models and data, and then AI assistance so that we can eliminate cyber vulnerabilities at hospitals before there's ransomware attacks, which again have life or death consequences. Just in conclusion, these breakthroughs, existential risks, and Band-Aids, they all coexist, right? We don't get one without the other. So the real question is, how do we maximize those benefits while minimizing the chance of harm? And really, the future depends on what we decide to do next.
Wonderful job. So we have, again, 2 individuals with headsets. Pass you around mics. We have our first question right here.
Hello? Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad I took the coach or whatever it was this morning with you. Great talk, good overview. I like your emphasis. Really, I'm not sure what the right third word is, but the most important variables in biology and medicine are time, context, and for lack of a better term, I have to think about it, is data clarity, right? And the whole issue of comparability, this and that. And that is often lost. The drift point you made, this has been known for years and years and years. Insurance companies know it, all sorts of people. We developed models for looking at severe chronic anemia populations, predictive models, which were great, but they have to constantly change. And then there's another issue. Are you predicting an event in 1 year or in 20 years? How do you go back and check that the model worked? And then the other problem is the model has to be different because the context is different. And then just on the, as you know, there's been a lot of use of claims data, and it's well known, but not talked about it, that how you code the claims regularly changes.
It does.
But their models don't change, these guys. So that was great. So I'm just gonna, the other thing is, you're talking about identifying in blood bacterium. And then you said 100%. Okay, that's a big statement. So I've worked in sepsis.
It is.
And there isn't 100%. It's been one of the big problems. Is it 100%?
Yeah,
How do we know it's 100%?
This is, I guess, knowledge having worked at ARPA-H and talking directly with the performers. It was performing 120% better than the gold standard. So they did an experiment where they put a certain number of bacteria in the blood and they were able to get 100% out. So that's in a lab environment. Now, whether that continues in a hospital environment,
right.
I think there's questions about the stickiness of bacteria and all of that. That is all work that is in the future or just beginning right now. So I take your point, right?
And is there
Will that continue in a clinical setting? It's an open question.
Is there any possibility of including viruses at some point? That's just too tough and not to crack.
It's a great question. I think that the current funding that I'm aware of has focused on bacteria. They are also interested in looking at like immune cells in the future and everything. A lot of that depends on government funding, which I think has already been commented on.
Larry's going to kick me, but I have 2 quick other things. Bias in the literature.
Sorry, man with the handsome eyebrows. Sorry. You've asked several great questions in a row, and we're going to go right here.
So thank you for emphasizing the importance of guardrails.
Yes.
But when you're comparing the accuracy of something like a chatbot for medical advice, what is ground truth? Because if ground truth is the experts in the field, they're not perfect either. So how do you deal with that?
I think that's a great question, and it's an active area of research. I think that there's going to be some areas where we have enough of consensus around ground truth right? Where that's where we need to start. And then I think there's other areas where perhaps the right answer is to say, like, hey, look, there's several different ideas. This is actually still something that is not well understood by the medical profession, right? And I think being very transparent about that. Actually, if you look at people's trust in medical advice over time, it's very important to set up that expectation, being transparent about where there's uncertainty so that folks will continue to trust down the road. So just stating that uncertainty is important.
Okay, thank you so much. We have our next question here.
Hello, yeah, I really like you talk. You cover a lot of things. My question to you is that you show hallucination for some of the models, large language models, like 50%. I wonder if you have a similar figure for doctor hallucinations.
Yep, that gets into a great question about metrics and baselines, right? So our ultimate, like where's our baseline? What are we trying to get across? And I think ultimately we need to think carefully about what are the metrics we're trying to do, and is our gold standard to be better than an average clinician? Is our gold standard to pick folks that have the best patient outcomes and say we need to outperform the best experts, like practitioners in that part of the field, and that becomes our bar? I think defining those metrics is going to be incredibly important. And one more thing on metrics, there's an organization, Future House, that looks at scientific discovery. They're a nonprofit. They've actually looked at LLM accuracy across chemistry and defined like metrics and benchmarks. And once folks publish on that, what will happen is a lot of the large companies will then try and perform well on those benchmarks. So to a certain extent, having a nonprofit that's saying these are the right benchmarks, these are good metrics, will create an incentive function.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have our next question queued.
Great talk, Jen. So just building on this point, actually, what I think is kind of interesting about AI is that there's sort of one view of LLMs where you sort of treat it as an oracle in a box, and your job is to ask it the right question, and it spits out the right information. We all know that's like problematic and lots of issues there. There's sort of another view of it, which I think is unique, which is that it's like effectively some kind of coordinator in which there are millions of active users, humans who have real expertise in different areas. And I'm sort of curious how you think about that with regards to like the clinical sort of like world and AI and other things where like, do you think there are opportunities to think about sort of AI human collective intelligence where like the AI can actually probe the right person, right? Or not just one person, but like a whole like variety of people, right? To like verify the accuracy of things. And how does that affect the biosecurity world as well?
Yeah, and I think there's some folks thinking about this in the social science world about how, because I think one of the challenges there is you have like interviews, which classically are very time consuming, and then surveys, which are not responsive, right? So they're thinking about how do we make it so that we can use LLMs to scale out interviews to far more people and make it very dynamic so that we get the most important information or the most interesting, right? So happy to connect you to a nonprofit that's thinking about that. I think the same type of approach could be used to pull together clinical information in a way that could be really powerful.
Great. If we're timely, we can get 3 more and then see. So we have one.
I'll try to go quick. So first, Jennifer, thank you for a great stand-in presentation. Very well done. Second, I'm jealous of the eyebrows, but to address the question, are you familiar with Radiatric and the work they're doing with excorporeally treating sepsis and bacteremias with light spectrums, also being studied in virus and fungal as well? So they could be an addition to your slide.
Awesome.
Yes, ma'am.
We have our next question here and then here. Sorry.
Thanks again for the stand-in. I just wanted to comment that with the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about antibiotic resistance, and if you're here this morning, I was kind of bringing that up with E. coli. My mom acquired C. diff, and then finally got over that, but she needed a fecal transplant. But then after the fecal transplant, the UTI started, which was, they can screen for so much in that. And so now it finally caught up with me, and I've gone through 3 or 4 different antibiotics and still working to get rid of it. Luckily with her, I can do silver, something so inexpensive, but no one knows about that, and no one is involved in that treatment. And most everyone in here that's over 60, 65 is going to eventually maybe enter that realm. But anyways, long story short, they do use silver catheters, but a lot of urology clinics don't even use those. But anyways, getting back to antibiotics, in earlier presentation, they were talking about, NIH being funding cut, and you're talking about that as well. And this is going to sound crazy, and I'll just end on this, and this is the question. Many years ago when this conference, Larry got this started, and thanks again, of course, Larry, I brought up Rife Technologies, and I wasn't sure if that was still viable, but I just Googled it, and so it's still out there. But long story short is everything has an electromagnetic signature. And based off of that signature, like Curlin photography, you can create a frequency above or below any type of pathogen to disable it and render it. I know it's science fiction sounding, like maybe that movie, The Passengers, where you can jump in the machine, like Star Trek or whatnot. But since that we're not going in that direction, why not let's just do what's the most affordable? Let's not fund big pharma in this endless cycle of trying to get around things when the science has been there for many, many, many decades. Thank you. Maybe more of a comment than a question.
You have a little time? Is that directly related to this question? Not at all. Okay, do you mind if I... It's a Larry. It's one of the ones we love.
I get 3. This is number 3. I'm done. The thing that I found most worrisome about your talk, which I also loved, was your use of the pronoun we. Because I think we don't have a chance against OpenAI and Elon Musk and all those guys. They're going to decide the rules. The rules were decided in your wonderful slide about car safety over time, competition, federal rules, seat belts, safety chairs and seats. So I don't see any of that happening yet, and I wonder if you do. It's a short question.
Thank you.
I do. I think there's communities, especially clinician-led communities, that see the real need, right? And I think a key part of this is right now the liability is ambiguous, right? So if there's a radiology diagnostic that gets the wrong answer, is the hospital liable? Is the AI company liable? Or is it the clinician? And depending on your perspective, like that's really going to have a big impact, right? So I think when I say we...
The New York Times said when Elon Musk and Sam Altman are in jail, they have the regulation. In the New York Times. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Listen.
I think what we can all do, because we all interact with the medical system, is we can communicate a signal to our clinicians and whatever hospital or clinic we're going to, that when they're saying like, hey, do you want to use this AI component? You can say, well, do you have data for how it's been working with your patients for the last 6 months? And they're most likely not going to, but that creates a demand signal. And really the demand signal also needs to come from the hospitals, right? And reimbursement, right? If you look at what's happening in the self-driving car area, the safety statistics are actually used to market and to convince people that it's a safe enough product. So if we set the bar that really you do need to be able to have this safety information, be able to provide it to people for doctors and patients to trust it, then that creates a market incentive for that industry to really take off.
Okay, great. Thank you for most. We have the last 2, and then we're cutting to the next speaker.
All right, thanks. I'll be real brief. And I wonder, after hearing this, if this has anything to do with Larry's and everybody's fears, right? But most people, I think when they use these AI machines, they look at them as sort of static software pieces that are just set in stone, whereas they're really supposed to be trained constantly, right? And isn't that that is the real answer to try to get by, all the problems, all the issues. And so my question is, who do you see, where do you see in companies or in institutions that are really setting up constant training programs for their AI agents that they're using?
I think we see examples in academia, which admittedly is not yet companies. And I think there's a number of nonprofits that are going in that direction. I'm happy to talk with you offline.
Okay.
Okay, and then one more right here.
Okay. So based on my understanding, some huge problems with AMR are, first of all, like there's not a ton of incentive to research it because it's not super profitable, and also AMR is like arguably most severe in developing nations. And so like since you've been at kind of the top of like developing these tools, I'm wondering if you can speak to the feasibility of eventually deploying these tools in developing nations, and if this is an active area of conversation.
Yes, it is. I think the folks that are developing those types of capabilities actually have several different devices that they're looking at. We talked about the hospital one and the research one. There's also talk about one that can help in lieu of resources environments. And that might be different countries. It could also be agricultural context. There's, I think, the same type of physical devices that are in your cell phone camera, right? There's actually a lot of signal processing that's going on to make those cameras very accurate. You can use the same type of biophysical in order to create a lower cost device that maybe is screening for 10 different bacteria instead of millions. So they are thinking about scale and price point, and there's some active collaboration with some philanthropic organizations worldwide to increase the amount of philanthropic support to get that type of technology out across the world. Happy to talk more.
Okay, thank you for one round of applause for Dr. Robert.